What's up, everybody? It's Legal Tender. Back in the building, back in the vault. Pulled out some notes to make a new video. All right, first and foremost, as always, thank everybody for the love and support of the channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate it. The subscriptions are going up. The comments are coming in. If you have any comments or questions, put them down in the bottom and I will respond back as soon as possible with the most educated answer that I have, or the most educated answer I can find. So again, for the support of the channel, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you're a fan of numismatics or paper currency, stay rocking with me, stay rocking with the channel. And we all know every week is Legal Tender Tuesday. So I'll be making a new episode speaking about something new or something different regarding numismatics and paper currency. So with that being said, today's episode, I will be speaking about web notes. As we see, series year 1988. All right, so what is a web note? A web note, it was an experiment. There were experimental notes that were printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing between the years 1992 and 1996. The Bureau of Engraving and Printing was looking to develop a quicker and more cost-efficient way of printing U.S. currency. And with that being said, they decided to use a web press machine. A web press machine or a web press is a method that they tried. During this experiment, the Treasurer of the United States was Kathleen Villapundo, and the Treasurer was Nicholas F. Brady during this inaugural series run of 1988A. All right, so like I said, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing did the web press experiment for 4 years, from 1992 to 1996, but there was only 3 series years printed. And we have series year 1988, 1993, and series year 1995. And the secretary and the treasurers of those years were, like I said, for the inaugural print run, it was Villapundo and Brady for series year 1988. Mary Ellen Winthrop and Floyd, what's his name? Not Floyd, Lloyd M. Benson, series year 1993. And Winthrop again, and Robert E. Rubin for series year 1995. So those were the series years printed in the secretary and treasurers during those print runs. So let's talk about a web press machine. A web press is a machine that uses continuous rolls of paper, much like newspaper, like a newspaper machine. See, this is the continuous roll right here. And this paper still have the components of what it takes to make a note, which is 75% cotton and 25% linen, just in one big spool instead of those individual sheets. All right, so with the web press, they were quicker and cheaper than Intaglio printing, which uses flat sheets. The notes produced were dollar bills from the series year 1988A, 1993, and 1995. These notes were only printed in Washington, D.C., and never printed at the Fort Worth facility. See, this is the web press machine right here. This is the paper. And it ran through, and like I say, more to follow as I break this down a little bit more. These notes are considered legal tender They are not error notes, but experimental notes. And the scarcity of these notes, the thing that made them scarce is that they were only printed for 4 years and only had a series print run of 3 series. So that's what makes these notes rare. And it gives it a little more overall face value than a traditional Intaglio style of printing. In May 1991, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing installed the weld press at the Washington, D.C. printing facility to test the new way of printing $1 bills. The BEP officials hoped that this new method would replace the old style of printing. And there was 2 styles of printing. You had the traditional Intaglio standard style of printing, and then you had the weld press. So with the Intaglio style of printing, it was sheet fed, pre-cut sheets of either 32 notes or 50 notes. 32 or 50 notes. And with the Intaglio style of printing, to make one sheet, it was printed 3 times. First, they print the reverse side of the note because it consumes the most ink. Print this first, let it dry for 72 hours. Then they print the obverse side, let this dry, they put everything on it. Let this dry for 72 hours. And then on the last print, they add the Treasury seal and the series, the serial number. So 3 prints to make 1 sheet of notes. And in 1 hour, 8,000 notes were produced and ready to be put into circulation. Now with the weld press style of printing, like I say, would have been on 1 continuous roll, much like a newspaper, it just ran through. And with that style of printing, the reverse and the obverse side were both printed simultaneously. So front and back were both printed at the same time. 96 notes were printed in 1 pass. And in 35 minutes, 10,000 notes were ready for circulation. So this weld press style of printing was definitely the faster way of printing notes. The continuous roll printing process is visually similar to a newspaper. But there were some problems that came with this method of printing right here. Problems arose with the weld press. The main drawback was its inability to maintain long run periods. So with the weld press machine, with the machine being this big, they had a bunch of mechanism, cogs, wheels, flywheels, belts, things like that. So the bigger the machine was, the more likely it was able to break down because it was more mechanical mechanisms used to make the machine. So the machine broke down quite often, pretty much. And then the overall end product of the bills, it didn't look as crisp as the Intaglio style of printing. The Intaglio style of printing was more man-driven, and it was a bit more meticulous. So the notes came out looking better, and it was less stoppage because you didn't really have to do much maintenance on a machine with the Intaglio style of printing. So because of those issues right there, the end product not looking too good and constant breakdown and maintenance of the machine, which led to more money being put into the process of making money. Because of those 2 issues, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing decided to put an end to the weld press experiment on July 1996. So it's a couple different ways to identify weld notes. And I'm finna show you. So let me see. Zoom in a little bit. This little number right here, weld press front plate number. That's what it was. These things had plate numbers and not plate position numbers. So looking at this WordPress note and this traditional Intaglio style of printed note. So let me break it down like this. So it's a couple different ways to identify a web note. You have this one small single number right there. That number is called the WordPress front plate number. And I'll try to explain that to make that make sense in a second. All right, so let me see. With the Intaglio style of printing, you had plate positions. It was broken down in quadrants. So it'd be 4 quadrants broken down in alphabets A through H. So B2. So on a note, on the top left-hand side, it'll be B2, and that will identify the plate. It will identify where this one individual bill was on that sheet of 32 or 50 notes. With the WordPress note, since it was on one continuous spool of paper, it was no plate position. That's why you won't find a plate position designator up here. Only the front face plate number, that right there. Another way you could identify a web note. Web notes were only printed in Washington, D.C. No matter the denomination of the note, because notes are only printed in 2 locations, in Washington, D.C. and Fort Worth. If a note was printed in Fort Worth, it would have the abbreviation FW. Right there. With FW standing for Fort Worth. Any note, regardless of denomination, that was printed in Washington, D.C. will not have any identifying feature right there at all. It won't be DC, it won't be W, it'll just be blank. So if it's blank, it is automatically assumed that that bill, whatever the denomination is, was printed in Washington, DC. So you can identify it by nothing being a. You can also identify it by the series year. And like I said, the web notes were only printed in 3 series. 1988, 1993, and 1995. You can also identify it by the Secretary of the United States, as I were the Treasurer of the United States, and the Secretary of the Treasury. And those were Villapundo and Brady for series year 1988. We'll see him down there. And we have Winthrop for series year 95 and 93. And then we have Rubin for 95 and Benson for 93. So I'm gonna break this down right here in a second. That's another way to identify. Now if you flip it over to the back, you have this back plate number as well. Bring that up. And it would be a little bit to the right of the truss by the model In God We Trust, a little off to the right. This being a web note, and this being a Intaglio style printing a note, we have the back plate. It would be at the bottom. The back plate position identifier would be at the bottom. holding the two up in comparison. All right, C. A small number at the top, nothing right here. And we got this small number by the string of pearls at the bottom. And we got nothing right there. So that's how you identify web notes. So like I said, a couple ways to identify them is by the series year, the secretary and the treasurer, no plate position being there, no location identifier being there, and then you have the small front face plate number right there. You flip it over and we have the back plate position up top to the right of trust. So there's 6 different ways to identify a web note. All right, so let's get into the fun facts. All right, so fun fact about the web notes. Besides these notes being printed from 1992 to 1996, with only 3 series being printed, and we have 3 treasurers of the United States, and let me see, 2. You had 2 treasurers of the United States and 3 secretaries of Treasury. All right, so we know that there are 12 Federal Reserve banks, but of the 12 Federal Reserve banks on series year, let's find it. On the series year 1988, only 6 Federal Reserve banks put in circulation web notes. And those 6 are Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond, Atlanta, and Chicago. So those are the only 6 Federal Reserve banks that put into circulation web notes of series year 1988. Of series year 1993, 9 Federal Reserve banks issued web notes: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis, and San Francisco. And of the 1988 A series, the only Federal Reserve bank that issued star notes was Atlanta. 3 Federal Reserve banks issued star notes from 1993, and that is New York, Philadelphia, and Atlanta. In 1995 series, 10 Federal Reserve banks issued web notes: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, Chicago, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and San Francisco, with 6 issuing star notes: Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond, and Atlanta. So, fun fact, the only 6 banks issued all 3 series years. That is Boston, New York, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Richmond, and Chicago. And of those 6, Atlanta is the only bank to issue web notes of all 3 series. We got a Boston, we got a New York, we got another Boston. So that was a pretty cool collection. If you could get a star note from all 3 series in Atlanta, I think you have some on your hands. Okay, so those are my web notes. I got all 3, so I'm glad I got all 3 series years. And super happy I was able to share this information with you. All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the support as always. Like I said, if you're a fan of numismatics, paper currency, stay rocking with me. Stay rocking with the channel. And until next time, keep it legal. Keep it tender. Talk to you soon.